Massive guard failure exposes fragility of cyber defense. Crowdstrike, Cloudflare outages sign of systemic weakness. Author K. Ravindran. The disruption inflicted by the cybersecurity firm and the web infrastructure provider offers a sobering reminder that even the protectors are vulnerable. On 19 July 2024, Crowdstrike caused an update-related blackout that cost more than $5.4 billion in aggregated losses. Transport firms, banks and hospitals were immobilized as systems crashed globally and operations stalled. And now, Cloudflare, engaged in similar operations, was responsible for a worldwide outage as the web service provider knocked thousands of websites offline, brought some merger and acquisition processes to a halt, and exposed the reliance of global business on one infrastructure layer. The two events reveal a critical paradox of our wired world. The very guardians of cyber threats now require guarding themselves. The first of those incidents involved the security vendor's flagship platform, pushing an erroneous software update into Microsoft Windows environments. That update triggered millions of devices to crash or become unresponsive, affecting major airlines, healthcare systems, and financial institutions. One leading airline alone reported losses approaching $500 million after canceling thousands of flights over several days. The ripple effects reached far beyond immediate downtime. Hospitals were unable to access patient health records, payments could not be processed, and operational control rooms shut down. The scale of the event demonstrated that a single fault in infrastructure software can cascade into system-wide paralysis across sectors. The second event involved the web infrastructure provider, whose network handles roughly 1/5 of global web traffic. A surge of unusual traffic caused internal degradation, resulting in error messages across major platforms such as social media networks, AI tools, and streaming services. Thousands of reports surfaced in user tracking tools, and while the company moved quickly to fix the fault, the interim damage illustrates how concentrated dependencies can undermine global operations. In both cases, the companies were meant to be safeguards, one against cyber threats, the other against web infrastructure disruption, but their failures proved that no entity is immune. There are several lessons to draw from these episodes. First, resilience and redundancy cannot be delegated entirely to the vendors. Organizations that rely heavily on single-vendor solutions or monocultures of infrastructure are exposed if that vendor fails. For example, airlines that depended deeply on the security vendor's platform found themselves immobilized because manual fallback systems were absent or insufficient. Second, even when a vendor is tasked precisely with prevention of malicious attacks, that vendor's own robustness must be treated as mission-critical. The assumption that a cyber defender is beyond failure is no longer tenable. Third, systemic risk resides in the concentration of infrastructure control. When one firm carries a broad swath of traffic or protection, whether 20% of web traffic or 60% of large corporations, the failure modes become global in scope, not just individual. Fourth, proper testing regimes, phased rollouts, and transparent communication are foundational. In the security software case, the company conceded that its update deployment had gone wrong. The ripple damage followed a fault in a configuration file that triggered cascading machine crashes. The web traffic provider's postmortem likewise points to a spike of anomalous traffic that its systems could not absorb without error. But corrective action comes after the fact. Critically, the human dimension remains central. Many organizations treated cybersecurity and infrastructure services as commodity solutions rather than strategic linchpins tied to business continuity. The fact that an update from a cybersecurity vendor grounded airline fleets for days indicates that fail-safe protocols, alternative routing, manual overrides, and incident playbooks were either missing or not sufficiently tested. In the web traffic failure, the widespread user impact suggests that many sectors had insufficient visibility into their service chain dependencies. Some may not have realized how much of their functionality passed through that provider's network until it vanished. From a policy and corporate governance perspective, the implications are significant. Boards and senior executives must treat third-party cyber providers and infrastructure services not merely as vendors, but as critical dependencies warranting rigorous oversight. Due diligence and vendor risk management must extend beyond contractual service level agreements to scenario planning for vendor failure. Regulators and insurers will likewise need to refine their frameworks so that exposure to such service provider breakdowns is clearly quantified and disclosed. The security software failure cost billions in insured losses across multiple industries. Organizations may assume they are protected against external attacks, but if the protector fails, the cascade can be just as damaging. The era of trust but verify in cyber defense must evolve into verify the protector. In other words, trust in a vendor must be backed by independent assessment of that vendor's capacity for resilience, incident recovery, and fault isolation. Any service provider whose failure can disable financial transactions, hospital systems, or global supply chains demands the same level of scrutiny as those systems at the endpoints. Moreover, the design of networked systems must assume that even foundational defenders can fail. Fallback architectures, layered defenses, independent detection and response capabilities must be intrinsic to the design, not added as an afterthought. Ultimately, these two high-profile failures highlight that the architecture of modern business is only as strong as its weakest major link. In a world where the threat landscape evolves constantly, and where service providers may be subject to their own internal bugs or traffic anomalies, the notion that protection is absolute has been exposed as an illusion. The guard must now be guarded. The conversation must shift from, how do we protect ourselves from external attackers, to, how do we protect ourselves if our protector is brought down?